Hey everyone, welcome to the Good Book Podcast. I'm Sam.
I'm Nick.
And we're here to talk about a very special book today. For our new listeners, we put this podcast together because we love to talk about books, and we've been talking about books for ages anyway, and we decided to formalize it a little and find a way to discover new books at the same time. Every week, we pick out a year and we find a book that won an award in that year, and we read it and talk about it. And it's really fun for me because I get to read books that I never would have thought to pick, or it's been really fun so far, and looking forward to more.
Yeah, we're kind of like lifestyle curators.
Yeah, exactly. We're influencers.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so this week's book, The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. Nick, give me your one-sentence review.
Yeah, so my one-sentence review, The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov, is a cosmic triptych whose central questions have only gotten more relevant over the last 50 years.
Okay, and mine is The Gods Themselves, a saucy tale of bickering physicists and horny aliens written in the driest possible way.
That's it. We could stop right now.
Yeah, that's the book. All right, so this... Remind me, what year was this published, and what award did it win? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so this is actually, I believe, the most decorated book that we have done so far, and maybe that we'll do this season.
Really?
Yeah, this was published in 1972, and it won the Nebula Award in 1972, and then it won the Hugo Award and the Locus Award in 1973. It's that's like pretty elite company in terms of, you know, a science fiction or a fantasy novel sweeping like the three most prominent awards.
That's really impressive. So I guess I got to ask, what was it competing against? Was there anything else out there?
You know, I actually forgot to look that up.
Oh.
But this was a time of, this is actually a time of like blossoming science fiction. And when I talk to you about the years, we'll sort of talk about why. But this was a time when science fiction was really starting to grow a lot darker and a lot more kind of psychological and sort of reflect a lot of the like cynicism in society. And Asimov had been seen as sort of like a more old school writer who wasn't really up stylistically to the newer, the kind of newer wave sci-fi writing. And so a lot of people saw this as a major triumph for him. And he says that this is his favorite novel that he ever wrote and the best novel that he wrote in his opinion, which is almost like an award in itself because he's published, depending on where you look, a lot of people have the number at 500 books.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it's more than Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, so far.
Puts it in perspective. Okay, wow.
Yeah. So this is a really prestigious book. This is a really decorated book. He's obviously a huge name. This is a lot less obscure than what we've been doing in episodes 1 and 2. And the really good news for our listeners is, unlike the first 2 episodes, you can find this book anywhere. You know, go to your library, go to your local bookstore, go online, check out the little libraries in your town. You know, this book is everywhere.
Do some dumpster diving.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
okay. So what about, you've hinted at a bit of the context of this. What else can you tell me about it and about Asimov and when this book came out?
Yeah, so I think we should start with the years, and then I can tell you a little bit about him. He's really interesting. So 1972 and 1973, I'll get into a little more of the sort of darker, anxiety-inducing stuff. But first, I would just say, culturally, in terms of art, right on par with what I would expect from the 70s, which is just like incredible stuff. Like 1972, looking at the top 5 films, got The Godfather at number 1, you've got Deliverance in the mix. 73, you've got The Exorcist up at the top. And then, albums, 72, we got Harvest by Neil Young, got Honky Chateau by Elton John, Superfly by Curtis Mayfield, Talking Book, Stevie Wonder, Exile on Main Street, The Rolling Stones. So it's great stuff. And then 73, got Dark Side of the Moon, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John, Inner Visions by Stevie Wonder, Quadrophenia by The Who. Just in terms of singles, 1972, you've got American Pie, which is like, I feel like that's like... it's like apple pie. It's like, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, fantastic creative period.
And then,
I love the music. Yeah.
1973, you've got Midnight Train to Georgia by Gladys Knight. I mean, this is like, we weren't around, obviously, but in terms of art, I feel like the 70s have a reputation, and it seems like that was definitely going on. Now, if you were actually living in the 70s, this was a little bit of it seems like a lot of people remember the 70s fondly, and I think it's partly for a lot of that great art, but this was a time of really increased cynicism, really decreased public trust in all of our institutions. Really a time when we're taking a hard turn as a country, and I think as a world, away from sort of that post-World War II, 50s and 60s, extreme patriotism, hopefulness about the future, kind of turning away from that. And there's a lot of reasons. We talked about it a little bit last episode, but Vietnam is still going on, and troop withdrawals have started. But, the last draft wasn't until June of 1973. And there's this sense of like, even if it is ending, it's not like, it's not like when World War II ended and there was this real sense of victory. It's more like, thank God that's over, right? And instead of this sense that we had like conquered some great evil and helped improve the world, it was more just like, what was this? What exactly were we doing? You know what I mean?
Right.
And then in 1972, you have Watergate. Nixon wouldn't actually leave office until 74, but you've got the news of the break-in, you've got all of the accusations, you've got public hearings all being out in the open in 72 and 73. And again, obviously we weren't there. I think it's easy to underestimate how much that changed the country, and a lot of people have written that like all of the kind of cynicism we have about politics now that we just sort of think is a normal part of our democracy really began with that incident. I'm sure that's an oversimplification, but it would make sense.
Yeah.
The last Apollo moon mission was in 1972, Apollo 17. And, it seems like there was a real sense of like sadness that came with that. Mainly in that, like, there had been all of the space race and all of this excitement to have this achievement of going to the moon. And, there were all of these sort of things that seem foolish in retrospect, people having these ideas that, soon we'd be going to other planets in the solar system and that, we'd have colonies on the moon and, that this would really expand everyone's access to outer space. So the fact that it ended in 1972 and the result felt so anticlimactic and disappointing compared to those expectations seemed to leave people in a state of like, I don't know if sadness is the right word, like melancholy maybe. It's one of those things where I think like when you achieve something that's been such a big deal, there is kind of a sense of emptiness that comes with realizing like, well, for the most part, life is the same. And the Cold War, obviously, which I do think also plays a huge role in this book. In 1972, you had the détente, so you've got the SALT I treaty, the anti-ballistic treaty. Nixon and Brezhnev signed those, but, it's not necessarily a sense of, now we're going to be safe. I think it's more a sense of like, okay, maybe we're not going to have like mutually assured destruction destroying our planet right now, but this still feels like a really unsettling, unsafe situation.
Like the world could blow up at any time.
Exactly. And so people have a lot of nuclear fear at this time. And Nixon also went to China in 72. The goal was to open them up diplomatically and create this sort of alliance against the Soviet Union, which strategically makes a lot of sense, but it also paints this whole effort as not being sort of as pure ideologically as I think people wanted to believe it was, or in the way like World War II is remembered, right? Like, I mean, Mao Zedong is obviously a communist leader, and this was supposed to be like against communism. And so again, even if people aren't against it, it does just add to this sense of like, okay, this isn't really about these pure principles. This is really about geopolitical gain. And so again, just increasing that sense of like cynicism and not necessarily trusting all the messaging that comes from our state. Yeah, so I think
it sounds kind of familiar, honestly.
Yeah. And that's why I do think a lot of the themes in this book like are still very relevant now. It's like things feel compromised. things kind of feel out of control, losing trust in institutions, a real increased cynicism, and all of this is happening. And I think a lot of the literature, at least in the sci-fi genre, kind of echo that. Yeah, so that's 72 and 73.
From everything you're saying, I can absolutely see how that ties into this book. And this book, in that context, I think makes more sense.
So I'll tell you about Asimov, really fascinating guy. Obviously, I mean, again, I imagine most people listening to this have heard of him at least, and I've probably heard.
He's one of those names you've heard of, right? But I don't know about you. I've never actually read one of his books until now.
I've read Foundation in the past. This is only my second one, though. So he's born in Soviet Russia in 1920. Family comes to the U.S. when he's very young and settles down in Brooklyn. And, very hard immigrant life when they first get to Brooklyn. And his dad eventually saves up enough money and buys a candy store. And this was sort of his dad's business. Eventually they would sell it and then buy a second one and lived above that one, and then sold it and bought a third one and lived above that. And then the fourth one was kind of like the last one, and they lived across the street from that. And Isaac was spending tons of time in these candy stores, either as a kid, just, parents are working at it, he's hanging around, or later on working at the store. And he is surrounded by all of these pulp magazines, just like mass market fiction magazines. And most of them are either science fiction or they're crime. And these magazines are where so many great writers got their start, especially during this period. And he's reading them constantly. And some of the more popular ones, Amazing Story, Astounding Science Fiction, Galaxy Science Fiction. I mean, this is not all before he started writing, but just some of the stories that were serialized in these magazines before they became novels. You've got Conan, you've got Starship Troopers, The Man Who Sold the Moon, Minority Report, Dune, serialized originally in pulp magazines in Analog, I believe, before it became a novel. Tombs of Atuan by Ursula K. Le Guin. Ray Bradbury had The Martian Chronicles. Most of the stories in there were serialized in pulp magazines before they were put into the short story collection. Fahrenheit 451 was originally published as a novella in Galaxy Science Fiction. Oh. And then in the crime ones, you've got Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, Patricia Highsmith, Elmore Leonard, Michael Crichton, writing under the name John Lang. All these authors are starting in these magazines and then eventually moving to novels. So he is just like constantly reading this stuff.
Yeah. Those are all, I mean, a number of those we're talking about household names. You were just talking about Dashiell Hammett the other week when we were talking about Silver Street.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, totally. And I feel like Dune is probably the science fiction novel that, you know what I mean? Like if you had to pull people. So, to think that's how it started. So he's reading these. He's going to New York City public schools during the Great Depression era, ends up at Columbia, gets a bachelor's in chemistry, master's in chemistry, a PhD in biochemistry. And at that point, he's already been published. So when he was 18, he sold his first story, which was called Marooned Off Vesta, to the pulp magazine Amazing Stories. He was paid $64 for that story. And
that was good money back then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as it went on, a lot of his most famous works, tons of his short stories were published in those magazines, but like Foundation, which I think is also one of like the cornerstones of science fiction, that was serialized. I, Robot was serialized. Nightfall. So yeah, after he finishes PhD, he goes to BU Medical School, teaching biochem, but he's writing all the time. I mean, this guy wrote thousands of words a day. And eventually they kind of decide that he does less and less research and more writing. And eventually they kind of decide that he can be on the faculty, but he's mainly going to be writing.
Oh, man. His science background, that makes a lot of sense now because there's so much science in this book.
Totally. Yeah. And a lot of chemistry.
That's amazing. Yes.
The totals on his books are like a little bit different wherever I look, but like 504 or 506 seem to really be the number. Over 280 of them are nonfiction books. So he wrote a lot of nonfiction science books, wrote a ton of novels, a ton of short story collections.
Book on Shakespeare, right?
Yeah, he has a book on Shakespeare. Yeah. Asimov on Shakespeare, which I now have and is really long and really big.
Oh, boy.
He doesn't say what his favorite works works are by Shakespeare, but he spends the most time on Macbeth and Hamlet, which,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I mean, very prolific writer. A few other just notes on him. He was afraid of flying, which is just something I found amusing as someone who writes so much about like intergalactic spaceship travel. Never flew. Didn't even like driving, actually. And, I mean, I guess you hear actually that more, I think. Like, he grew up in Brooklyn and then he was working at BU. I think you probably...
He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and most of the time when I meet people who don't really drive, it's often that they grew up in a place where there was really good public transportation and was walkable. Something I didn't know, he actually died of AIDS in 1992. He had gotten a blood transfusion during a bypass surgery and gotten HIV from that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and his family and the doctors that his family was working with all kind of decided to keep it under wraps because he was such a public figure and there was a real stigma at the time. Then his wife, in a new edition of his autobiography that came out, his wife wrote a foreword eventually and included that information.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
So that's Asimov. So how did this book come about?
So this was pretty deep into his time writing. And at the time he wrote it, he had written one like children's picture book that was science fiction, but it had been a couple years since he had published a science fiction novel. Yeah, and it's a little bit unclear, but he's very proud of this. And one thing he talks a lot about, and we'll get into the structure more, but especially the second section, he feels like what he calls over his head. So I think what he means is like, he feels like this was better than representative writing for him, that whole second section.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that second section in the spoiler cast.
Yeah.
It was definitely interesting. I can give it that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Let's dig into it.
Yeah.
So, what are your first thoughts? What stood out to you about this book?
I think there's a number of really cool things about it. I like the triptych style. So we've got these sort of three novellas that are interwoven in the sense that, there's a central story that they're all connected to, but they all take place in different settings. So the first story is on Earth, and the second story is in a parallel universe, and the third story is on Earth's moon. This all takes place in the future. I believe the events begin to unfold in 2070. Mm-hmm. And just to give people just the premise, without giving away too much, there's a scientist who arrives to his lab, and there's a container of sorts, some sort of chemistry lab container that had tungsten in it, and what's in there is no longer tungsten, and everything sort of unfolds from there. To talk about the positives of it, I did really think that there were a lot of interesting like thematic ideas in this. I think there's a lot of really important questions about technology and sort of the ethical concerns that come with technological advancement. I think there's a lot of interesting questions that I think we still don't totally know how to answer about like how to make major shifts in society when so many of our systems and so many people's livelihoods and so many people are benefiting from those systems.
Yeah, there's an inertia to technological advancement that can't be stopped.
Yeah, totally. Like, I feel like I don't necessarily know if this is what this was about, but like I think a lot of people talk now about fossil fuels, right? And like the question of like how do you shift? And it's like, well, think how many people are impacted by a shift like that, and like how do you even approach it? How do you get politicians to get on board with a change like that? And, there's so many different layers to it. And that is something, especially in part one, that is coming up a lot. Characters are trying to enact these changes that are really important that will literally save the planet. And, there's just so much resistance on so many different levels. And so to me, that felt like something that would be really relevant at the time he wrote it for all the things that we just went over, but I think also in our world today.
Yeah, I completely agree. That theme is that theme of how we deal with a collective action problem is really what resounded with me as well. There's a quote from it, which I don't think spoils things, but the easiest way to solve a problem is to deny it exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always enjoyed works that deal with that theme. One of my favorite movies is Doctor Strangelove,
Oh, so good.
which is, it's the end of the world, it's preventable, but can you get everybody to actually do it?
Yeah.
And more recently, Don't Look Up, also a really fun one.
I haven't seen that yet, but from what I've heard about it, I was thinking that this book might be related.
Yeah, it's basically Doctor Strangelove. Yeah, so I think that theme of the how the petty motivations of individuals and self-interest can prevent advancement, and I just thought that was very realistic. I kept thinking about the book Project Hail Mary, which came out recently and has become a big film success in contrast to this, because in Project Hail Mary, the world encounters a similar crisis at a similar near future point. And this isn't spoiling the whole book, but it's all very positive and everybody on Earth works together. It's almost a given that the whole Earth works in coordination to solve the problem. And that really got under my skin reading that book, because it was like, that's not how this works. They're going to fight.
Yeah.
They're going to fight up until the bombs are dropping. And in this, it's definitely it feels much more realistic that just that pettiness, that human pettiness really comes out. So I enjoyed that. That is the thing I liked in this book.
Yeah, I agree. And it works on so many levels. Like, it works on the level of, there's a quote at the beginning, like, the main scientist in this is not a very talented scientist. And there's a quote at the beginning about how, like, overwhelming stubbornness, the mediocrity's frightened need to safeguard pride would carry the day over, like, actual brilliance. And so, like, there's that level of, like, just the idea that, like, the egos of the people involved in these discoveries and pushing these things is an obstacle. And then there's another one about convenience, where we hear it is a mistake to suppose that the public wants the environment protected or their lives saved, and that they will be grateful to any idealist who will fight for such ends. What the public wants is their own individual comfort. We know that well enough from our experience in the environmental crisis of the 20th century.
Which he is experiencing right at that moment. Yeah.
Right. And, so there's also that level, obviously, of, like, everybody in their day-to-day lives is trying to live and get by, and things that are convenient are not easy to give up. And then let's not even overlook the fact that any system like this has tons of people whose careers and jobs are totally dependent on it. Right? And you think about any kind of system, right? Like fossil fuels now, or like, private prisons now, all of these things that I think most of us feel like we would like to get off of. But then, and I'm, for the record, I'm not saying we shouldn't be. I just want to be clear. But, like, none of it is as simple when you say, like, okay, well, but then in these towns, like, there are entire towns where people are employed by these industries. And, it's not a good enough answer to just say, like, okay, well, we're just going to leave them to figure it out. Right. So, it felt to me like he was bringing up the frustrating parts of it that caused people to be cynical, but that it also rang true of, like, no, but even beneath that, there are, like, even people who are, like, acting in good faith would meet real challenges trying to figure these things out,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, back then, the debate over clean air and water, coal mining, heavy metal smelting, those were the big questions in the 70s that people were grappling with and just coming to consciousness. And now we have data centers, and it's the same question. It's the same question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do. That is something I actually. This is an interesting thing. I feel like I am appreciating this book more after reading it than I actually did while I was reading it. Like, I feel like the more I've thought on it, the more I'm like, actually, this really is kind of like a timeless book in terms of what the social commentary is, has been applicable to my whole life, I can say, Yeah, so I definitely liked that. I mean, I thought that those things were presented in a very realistic way. And in a way that was, like, compelling and felt real. The second part has lots of interesting stuff. I mean, like, we've got a parallel universe. We've got an alien world with, like, a totally different family structure, different ways that aliens have sex with each other, and masturbate, and, like, all this stuff, right? And that's like, it was very imaginative and original. Like, it felt totally different from anything else I had read in terms of aliens.
It was very creative, and it was really interesting in a lot of ways.
I tend to find that those things with aliens and stuff work better for me when there's like less description of what they look like, and that kind of hit the mark here.
Yes.
Like I felt like I had all the information I needed to understand it, but like what I was picturing might have been totally different from what other people were picturing.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. I think he tried and he did something interesting. And I appreciated it for what it was, I would say. Yeah, that's what I can say about it. I thought it was an interesting depiction of aliens that was very imaginative. And I don't think it's what any of us expected from the first part. Or I don't know what you would expect from the first part, but it's not what I expected. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it did mix it. Yeah, I feel like from the first part, I was almost expecting like this to be like a real book about like politics and bureaucracy and that kind of tension with the sci-fi stuff, us getting that information in the background. Like I did not expect to suddenly be in a different universe, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a big picture book.
Yeah.
It doesn't really tie itself too closely to any of the characters. And I think that's for when you're trying to deal with these big philosophical problems like he is, that's a good way to tell a story.
Yeah, and I did appreciate that, like, you know, the first story is pretty hard sci-fi, I would say. There's a lot of chemistry and physics involved there. Mm-hmm. The second story felt a little bit less so. It felt more like anthropological almost. And then I felt like the third one was just like fun. Like I really thought I had a lot of fun with the third story, the one that takes place on the moon.
Yeah, I'd say that was my favorite part.
So they all had kind of distinct flavors. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So I guess that's what I'm saying. It was interesting. It wasn't too long, right? So like sometimes these books can really drag on with, especially as hard sci-fi as part one was. But yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff. And again, I really do think the social commentary is on point, and I can see why people felt like it was deserving of awards for that reason.
To me, this book does not deserve awards. To me, this is you need to have more than just a social commentary to have a good book. And for me, I guess we'll get into what we disliked, because this is, unlike the other books we've read, this one I just really had mixed feelings on. And I think you need more. The writing to me was unremarkable and overly scientific at times. I mean, I guess I'm not a hard sci-fi person, but moreover, I think you need to have a scientific background to really understand some of this stuff. And the story it was fine. There was some creative parts, but it didn't stand out to me. I liked the overall broad theme. Mm-hmm. How do you solve this imminent collective action problem that could destroy the world? That's a cool theme. I love that theme. But I think there are much better examples of works of art that deal with this.
Yes, I 100% agree. I wanted so badly to love this.
Yeah.
I really did. You know, partly because it's my pick, and this is our first letdown. But I think also just like I have respect for his legacy, you know, and I did like I read Foundation a long time ago, so it's possible that if I read it now, I wouldn't like it as much. You know, I don't know. It's like, I've said it before, I don't really like Led Zeppelin, but I respect them, you know. I almost feel like maybe that's what's going on here. And it's
I mean, and not all, you know, you guys written 500 books. Some of them got to be duds.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't say every book that Brandon Sanderson has written is golden.
Yeah, or even any of them.
That's certainly up for debate. Yeah.
Yeah, I did enjoy this more than the Brandon Sanderson books I've read, for the record.
My favorite Brandon's, I'm not going to get into that. I have read some Brandon Sanderson I like and some I don't, but that's another conversation.
Is this in the middle of those
Wait till he wins
groups?
an award. Huh?
Is this book in the middle of those groups?
Yeah. I don't know. There's some Sanderson I've enjoyed more than this book, and some I've enjoyed less.
Yeah.
If we're using the Sanderson scale, I guess. Yeah.
Man, even when I'm like not into him, he still just permeates everything, you know?
He's everywhere.
I mean, you know what's interesting is I feel like a big lesson I've learned over the past year, and reading the books for our show has just hammered it home, is that it was a mistake. I was misguided in the past to avoid older sci-fi and fantasy books, because I just felt like probably the tropes, the themes, the social commentary is probably sort of it's all probably derivative of these original books. to some extent, right? Not to say that there's not a lot of great original stuff now, but just like everything is derivative to a certain extent, you know? And so like, I bet if I go back and read that old stuff, it's not going to feel exciting. It's not going to feel original. And in almost every case, that has been like totally wrong. Like the book we're going to do next episode totally proved that wrong. The book we're going to do the episode after that also totally proved that wrong.
Yeah.
And there's been a bunch of other ones where I'm reading these fantasy and sci-fi books from the 1960s and I'm just like, man, like this feels unlike anything I've ever read and really exciting. And like you could drop this in 2026 and like I would never have even known that it was, you know, published 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And this one, unfortunately, the thing I fear and the reason I don't go back, like I had that exact feeling that I assume they all have. Just like, yes, the big question is interesting. And I feel a little bit of that dread. And honestly, putting it in context of the times also helped me, I think, appreciate it a little more. Like you said, like I've read so many great books about this dilemma. And there was just something about the writing that fell short for me. Like
it was the writing. It was the writing that fell short.
Yeah.
That's the thing about the writing. It was the writing itself.
Yeah, the writing itself. Yeah, it just wasn't fun. It wasn't exciting. You know, I mean, we're talking about existential crisis. We're talking about a whole different universe where aliens are sleeping with each other and masturbating and doing all kinds of wild stuff. And we're talking about the moon and like I actually did think there was some fun parts of the moon, but they were like few and far between. And
I enjoyed it. It just overall didn't. I thought it wasn't that exciting. The stories didn't feel totally connected.
I kept saying like, how many pages do I have left?
Yeah,
and that's exactly. Not what you want.
It dragged a lot in a number of places, and it didn't tie things together enough for me to feel satisfied at all with it. Yeah. It was very meandering, and that can be fun.
But it wasn't.
But it wasn't exactly. Not to mention, not to get on my high horse, but there were two female characters, and they were both very hypersexualized.
Certainly.
Which is like, all right, man, you know, product of the times, I understand, but
you know what? To be fair, Asimov has been criticized a ton for the fact that he basically doesn't write women, or when he does, they're not like real characters. So this was actually like, you know, for him, this was like major, you know. But
it's funny you say that because I do think one of the female characters, the female alien, was one of the best characters in the book.
For sure. Yeah.
For sure, right? But still hypersexualized.
Yeah. And the female character on the moon, I also really liked. I just feel like so they were interesting characters, but you're right. They were for sure were hypersexualized in context where, like, you know, I mean, again, we're talking about like existential crisis here. So that's like not the most important thing. I agree with all. I mean, again, I agree with those. I would say like lots of great ideas, and even like when I say the summary of it, I'm like, man, that book sounds amazing. But the writing just was flat for me. The writing was exactly what I kind of worry about older books being, which again has usually not been the case. So this is an outlier. But it's not like I hated it. Like you said, like there were a lot of great ideas. It was a pleasant read, but I also was just like, okay, I'm ready for this to be over. And I'm like, oh my God, we're only halfway through, you know?
Yeah. No, 100%. On the older book, what you were saying about older sci-fi and fantasy, I do think it's interesting that when we think of the great modern literature, we're often talking about the classics from 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, like Hemingway, T.S. Eliot. When we think of sci-fi and fantasy from back then, we do not treat it with the same reverence at all. It's because same what you're saying, I feel the same way. My instinct is like, oh no, that's just gonna be trash.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely not. Excepting this book, I guess. Well, it's not trash. I'm not gonna say it's But I have really enjoyed what I've read and how this podcast has pushed me to read it. So,
yeah. And you all will hear what those books are soon when we get to them.
Yes.
Definitely not trash. Just not well executed. I don't think, I think the ideas were there and the execution just didn't work for me. So it's not fun. And I honestly feel like when we're talking about sci-fi like this, It either needs to be really fun or it needs to be like the dread. You are like filled viscerally with the dread, and it wasn't either of those for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I've read it and I can say I've read it, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to read it again.
Yeah.
I should have led with this. I looked up the title because it was an interesting title, and it is a quote from Friedrich Schiller's play The Maid of Orleans. He was an 18th century German playwright, and the quote is, "Against stupidity, the gods themselves contend in vain."
Yeah. And then when you look at the sections, part 1 is called Against Stupidity, part 2 is The Gods Themselves, and part 3 is Contend in Vain, ?
Okay. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that play is about Joan of Arc.
Really?
Yeah.
That makes sense. That really fits. So thematically, I think he really thought about this, and he's doing some cool stuff here.
Yeah.
Real mixed review here, guys.
Yeah, so how are we going to rate this one?
Out of 5 pellets of plutonium-168, what do you give it, Nick?
I'm going to go with 3.
Yep, same here, 3.
Okay.
I feel like if you are interested and curious about early sci-fi and these themes, you might enjoy this book. But I don't think you need to read this in your life. There's many other books that are better than this.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. I would say, like, if you like sci-fi, I would say, and you tend to like books that have a lot of like social commentary and stuff, I would say go ahead and read it. Like, it's not very long, but yeah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't be like, you have to read this because it's so great, Really fast, just since you said the plutonium-186, can I just quickly give you the origin story of this book?
Oh, yeah, please.
So in 1971, Asimov is talking to Robert Silverberg, who's another sci-fi author, and Robert Silverberg had to refer to an isotope, just an arbitrary one. And he said plutonium-186. And Asimov said there is no such isotope, and one can't exist either. And so Silverberg dared Asimov to write a story about it. So then Asimov figured out the conditions under which plutonium-186 could exist and what complications and consequences it might imply. And I won't go too much more into it to avoid spoilers, but yeah, so it was a dare from a random conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, respect. He took that one idea and created a whole book out of it.
Yeah. All right, so 3 pellets of whatever element we landed on. Plutonium-186. Yeah, 3 pellets of that from each of us. Yeah, so that's a wrap on the gods themselves.
All right, so what's the next book?
Next book is a Sam pick, which I'm curious at the end of the season if people prefer Sam picks or Nick picks, or if they like think there's a common thread between each one,
Yeah, I want to know. I want our audience to tell us: are you Team Sam or Team Nick?
There's a really good Seinfeld episode about the picks, like the movie store picks, and which one you prefer. I remember Gene Picks was one of them. Like, anyways, it's going to be Niftaline by Michael Shea.
Niftaline. All right. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Cool. All right, so check out the spoiler cast if you've already read this or if you want to hear spoilers for some reason.
All right. See y'all later.
Bye.